Hey, what's going on, everybody? Today I'm going to be going over a poison counter commander brew with Rigo, Streetwise Mentor, as the commander. His colors are blue, white, and green, Bant, as they say. You may be wondering why the hell I'm using Rigo as a commander for a poison counter brew. Well, it's two reasons. The first is that I noticed a lot of creatures with toxic and infect, and even death touch. A lot of them have power one. So that ties in nicely with Rigo's ability of whenever you attack a player or planeswalker with one or more creatures with power one or less, draw a card. And also it ties in well with the strategy, with poison counter decks. You want to be attacking as many people as possible per turn so that you can give as many people as possible as many poison counters as possible. Well, Rigo triggers off of a player or planeswalker. So if you have three creatures with toxic on the board and you go to attack each of your opponents in a pot of four, you're going to be hopefully you're going to hit them all with toxic, and you're also going to draw a card for each different player you attack. And him having the shield counter as well when he comes down is nice because unless they're countering you or they held up removal to hit you twice, you're probably going to get the card draw when he comes down. So it gives you card draw off of your weak poison creatures. Now, there are two terms when it comes to poison counters. There's infect and there's toxic. Infect is the older one, and creatures with infect deal damage to other creatures in the form of -1/-1 counters, and they deal damage to opponents in the form of poison counters. So they don't actually deal damage. To creatures, they give counters of -1/-1, and to opponents, they give poison counters. So a 4/4 creature with infect, if they hit an opponent, the opponent's not going to lose 4 life. They're just going to get 4 poison counters. Toxic, on the other hand, does deal damage. So a 4/4 creature with toxic 3 is going to deal 4 damage to that creature it's attacking or being blocked by, or to the opponent it's attacking. But the difference is that a creature with toxic gives poison counters based off what the toxic number is, whether they hit for 1 or whether they hit for 4 if they're a 4/4. So say you have a 4/4 with trample that gets blocked by a 3/3, but it still hits the opponent for 1 damage. If it has toxic 4, it's given 4 poison counters. So that's the difference between toxic and infect. Okay. So the way you want to do this, like I said, is attack as many players with poison counters as possible each turn, because that's going to draw cards if Rigo's on the board, and it's going to give everybody poison counters more efficiently and more quickly. And then you're just going to want to proliferate everybody to hell. So I have Vincer in here just since he's at the top. You could swap him out if you want. His +2 isn't bad if you have ETB creatures. But this deck doesn't really run a lot of ETB. But really, I have him in here for his -1 of creatures being unblockable this turn. That guarantees you're going to hit opponents. And his -8's good if you can get to it. But he's definitely something you could take out. But anyways, here's the creatures. So I have Annex Sentry, Toxic 1, Power 1. When it enters the battlefield, exile target artifact or creature an opponent controls with mana value 3 or less. Blighted Agent is a 1/1 with infect. It's unblockable. Blight Mamba is a 1/1 with infect. It can be regenerated for 2 mana. Bloated Contaminator is one of the better cards in this brew, even though it doesn't synergize with Rigo. It's only 3 mana, and it's a 4/4 with Trample and Toxic 1. But whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you also proliferate. So it having Trample is huge. Cephalid Face Taker is nice because it can copy any creature on the board. It does remain a 1/4, however. So I would just copy a creature I control so that it becomes toxic or infect as well. But if there's an opponent's creature on the board that has a really good effect, you could copy that with Cephalid as well. Contaminant Grafter is another great card in here. It does cost 5 mana, but it's a 5/5 with Trample and Toxic 1. Whenever one or more creatures you control deal combat damage to one or more players, you proliferate. Then at the beginning of your end step, if an opponent has 3 or more poison counters, draw a card. Then you may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield. So it synergizes well with Evolution Sage, which has landfall ability of whenever a land enters under your control, proliferate. So, Contaminant Grafter, if an opponent has 3 or more poison counters, when it hits, you're going to draw a card. If you have a land, you're going to put that down. You proliferate because it hit. Or really, if anything hit, it doesn't have to be contaminant that hits. And then you're also going to proliferate again if evolution stage is on the board. Crawling Chorus is just a 1/1 that gives a 1/1 with toxic if it dies. Custody Soul Caller is another one that could be swapped out if you wanted to. It's just a little bit of graveyard recursion. Azuri, Stalker of Fears, he draws you a card whenever you proliferate, which is going to be pretty clutch in this brew. But then also, if you have the mana for it, whenever he enters, you can pay 3 of any color, and then you proliferate twice. Finn the Fangbearer is a good one to have if you're running Death Touch, but even just by himself, he's solid because he has Death Touch and is a 1/3 for 2 mana, and then his effect is whenever a creature you control with Death Touch deals combat damage to a player, that player gets 2 poison counters. So he himself could deal 2 poison counters per turn if he's able to get through, which obviously, for obvious reasons, people hate blocking creatures with Death Touch. But you combine him with something like Aura Frostfang, attacking creatures you control have Death Touch. Now all your creatures have Death Touch that are attacking, and then whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. So there's even more card draw. Glistener Elf is a 1/1 with Infect. Grand Abolisher, I do run things like Grand Abolisher, Voice of Victory in here. They just keep your opponents from casting spells during your turn, which means you can't get countered, means they can't remove you during your turn. They would have to use their mana on their turn to do it. You could run other stacks pieces in here, like Authority of the Consuls, or Silence, or things like that, just to slow down your opponents, because that will give you more time to hit them with poison. And also, if it's Authority of the Consuls, their creatures are going to enter tapped, so they're not going to be able to block. I'm actually probably about to add that right now that I think about it. But just things like that slow your opponents down, give you the ability to attack more freely. I don't know what I'll drop here. Probably one of the ones I just went over, like Custody Soul Caller or Venser even. Probably Custody. I'll just move him to the sideboard over here. But then you have Grateful Apparition, which is a 1/1 flyer, and whenever it deals damage, proliferate, which most of the time, if you're in a pot of 4, the other 3 guys, one of them's not going to be able to block a flyer, so you're pretty much going to be proliferating every time there. Then I have Guardian in here just for protection. Ichorspit Basilisk is interesting because it has Death Touch and Toxic 1. So if Finn is on the board, and I actually looked this up a little bit ago, if Finn is on the board, this thing will hit for 3 poison counters because it'll give 1 based off the toxic of 1, and then because of Death Touch, it'll give 2 more. So if you have creatures on the board that have toxic or that have infect, and they're on the board with Aura and Frostfang and Finn, you're going to be hitting for a lot of poison counters. Then Jawbone Duelist, Toxic 1, Double Strike. Phyrexian Censors is another stacks piece. You don't have to play it, but a good amount of creatures in this brew are Phyrexian. As I look at the creatures that aren't Phyrexian, there's another one. But anyways, each player can't cast more than 1 non-Phyrexian spell each turn, and then on top of that, non-Phyrexian creatures enter tapped. So it will impact some of your creatures, but overall it'll hurt the opponents more unless they're running a Phyrexian brew themselves. Plague Nurse, Toxic 2, pay 3 with 1 being a green mana, and each other creature you control with Toxic gains Toxic 1, meaning it'll just get increased. So like something like Glistener Elf, or wait, that's Infect. So something like Ichorspit would go up to Toxic 2 if you do that. Poison Dart Frog, I mean, this is another one you could drop really, but it's a good dork, add 1 mana of any color, but it's also a good defender because it has a reach. And it's a 1/1, so it synergizes with Rigo, and then you can pay 2 and it gains Death Touch, so it synergizes with Finn. Rotwolf, Infect, and then whenever a creature dealt damage by Rotwolf, this turn is put into a graveyard, you may draw a card. Skrelv is a staple in these, Toxic 1, and it also gives protection. What is that, 1 white, or you can pay life. Choose a color and tap Skrelv. Choose a color, another target creature you control gains Toxic 1 and hexproof from that color until end of turn, and it can't be blocked by creatures of that color this turn. Tainted Observer is a flyer with Toxic 1. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may pay 2 if you do proliferate. And then Takuthal's a great card for this, even though it doesn't have Toxic or Infect itself. If you would proliferate twice instead. Tetsuko Umezawa is a good one because creatures you control with power or toughness 1 or less can't be blocked. Thrumming Bird's another flyer. When it hits, you proliferate. Tyranax Rex is one of your better cards in here, even though it's expensive. It can't be countered. It has Trample, Toxic 4, Ward 4, and Haste. So, and it just hits for 8/8 since it's toxic and not infect. A really good card. Venerated Rot Priest is something you could brew around a little more, but with it being commander and it's not a legendary creature, so it can't be the commander yourself, and you can only have one in there. That's kind of a drawback to brewing more so around it. But I mean, Toxic 1, it's also a 1/2, but whenever a creature you control becomes a target of a spell, target opponent gets a poison counter. So it's kind of a deterrent from opponents using removal on you, at least targeted removal, because you can give them a poison counter. That being said, if you add more cards into your brew that have, you know, have the ability to target your own creatures, you can start dishing out poison counters even more. Like Infectious Bite is one of them, but I think it might be one of the only ones I have in here besides some protection spells like Galadriel's Dismissal or something. Um, then Viral Drake is a classic. It's a flyer with Infect. It's a 1/4. Then you can pay 4 with 1 being a blue mana and you proliferate. You can do that multiple times if you have the mana for it. Viridian Corruptor, Infect, is a 2/2, and it destroys an artifact when it enters. Already went over Voice of Victory. Then I have Welcoming Vampire in here just for extra card draw, because almost every creature in this brew, except for a few, have power 2 or less. That brings me to just kind of more proliferate type cards. Expand the sphere. Look at the top 6 of your library. Put up to 2 land cards from among them onto the battlefield tapped, and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. If you put fewer than 2 onto the battlefield this way, proliferate a number of times equal to the difference. So it says up to 2. So you don't have to put 2, as far as I'm aware. So you could just play this as a double proliferate card. Noxious Assault's a good one. It does negate Rigo's ability because they won't be 1 or less power, but it gives your creatures +2/+2, and whenever a creature blocks this turn, its controller gets a poison counter. Sunfall for removal, Tezzeret's Gambit, draw 2 cards, proliferate. Thirsting Roots, search your library for a land, it's basic, or you can proliferate instead. Triumph of the Hordes. This is a game-winning card, and it's actually really good that it's only 4 mana too. So until end of turn, creatures you control get +1/+1 and gain trample and infect. So like, it gives everything infect and it gives them trample. So even if they get blocked and they only get through for 1, they're still dishing out a poison counter. And then if you have stronger ones, it makes them even better. And then if it adds infect on top of something that also has toxic, so Contaminant Grafter, even though it already has trample, it would become a 6/6 with infect and toxic. So I believe it would potentially dish out if it were to hit straight up on a player. I believe it would dish out 7 poison counters in that scenario. Then White Sun's Twilight I have in here. It creates X 1/1 Phyrexian Mites with Toxic 1. But if X is 5 or more, it destroys all other creatures. So then you would have a board state with 5 1/1s with Toxic, and then you could play Rigo, and whenever you attack, you would draw a lot of cards and dish out a lot of whatchamacallit, poison counters. I would double check myself on the Triumph of the Hordes with the combination of Infect and Toxic, because since Infect doesn't actually deal damage, it only dishes poison counters. I'm curious if the two together, if one would override the other. I believe they would both still dish poison counters. I believe, but definitely double check me on that. That's something I just thought about. Then I do have Cosmic Rebirth in here just for a little bit of graveyard recursion. It could be dropped though if you wanted to. And then I have some protection spells like Counterspell, Fuel for the Cause, which is an expensive counter at 4 mana, but it does proliferate. Galadriel's Dismissal, Heroic Intervention, March of Swirling Mist, Negate, Void Slime, Rapid Vigor. And then I have Double Major in here just to double up on a creature that might be a really good one. Like if I had Bloated Contaminator at only 3 mana, I could pay 5 in total and have 2 Bloateds out there. Experimental Augury is nice that it's an instant. Look at the top 3 of your library, put one of them into your hand, and then proliferate. The rest go on the bottom of your library. Infectious Bite I touched on earlier, but target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to target creature you don't control, and then each opponent gets a poison counter. So you also want cards like that say each opponent gets a poison counter, because you don't have to do anything except just play the card. You don't have to hit the opponent. You don't have to do anything. Everybody gets a poison counter. Another one, Prologue to Phoresis. Each opponent gets a poison counter. Draw a card. Then Glistening Sphere is nice because when it enters, it does enter tapped, but you proliferate when it enters, and then you can tap it the next turn for 1 mana of any color. And then if an opponent has 3 or more poison counters, you can tap it for 3 of any one color instead. Meekstone's a good one because any creature with power greater than 2 may not be untapped as normal during the untapped phase, which is nice because most of my creatures in this brew are 2 or less, so you untap while your opponents probably don't. And then I have Weathered Runestone in here just because a lot of guys in my pod like to play Graveyard Recursion, but it keeps non-land permanent cards in graveyards and libraries can't enter the battlefield. Players can't cast spells from graveyards or libraries. That's one you could swap out though if you wanted to, if your pod doesn't really play a lot of Graveyard Recursion. Already touched on Authority, I added that earlier. Crackdown, non-white creatures with power 3 or greater don't untap during their controller's untap steps. So it kind of impacts you with things like, I guess, Bloated Contaminator, Contaminant Grafter. So if they're on the board, I just wouldn't play Crackdown, but otherwise you're pretty in the clear. Inexorable Tide, whenever you cast a spell, Proliferate. Norn's Decree, whenever one or more creatures an opponent controls deals combat damage to you, that opponent gets a poison counter. So just more of a deterrent from them attacking you because they're going to get more poison counters. And I mean, eventually, if you're able to get them to 8 or 9 poison counters, nobody's going to be attacking you. Propaganda, just more deterrent from them attacking you. Skrelv's Hive's a good one. At the beginning of your upkeep, you lose 1 life and create a 1/1 Phyrexian Might with Toxic 1. As long as an opponent has 3 or more poison counters, they have lifelink if they have Toxic. And that's pretty much it. I mean, like I said, you could go through and add more stacks, pieces like Collector Oofy or something, Damping Sphere, things like that. You could add more removal. There's definitely pieces in this brew that you could drop. I mean, Vincer the Sojourner is one of them. Poison Dart Frog's another one. Already dropped Custody Soul Caller. I mean, you could really drop Cephalid Face Taker if you wanted to, but I think it fits in pretty nice. You could drop Double Major if you wanted to. I mean, there's definitely some cards that are droppable. You could go heavier on the Death Touch if you wanted to, and if you wanted to run Finn more so, things like that. Or if there's more cards that say, each opponent gets a poison counter. There are 2 lands I want to touch on. I don't normally do lands, but this one I'll do. So Ink Moth Nexus, pay 1, and it becomes a 1/1 Phyrexian Blink Moth with flying and infect until end of turn. And then Karn's Bastion, pay 4 and tap it, and you proliferate. So essentially, get as many creatures out, attack as many opponents at a time as possible, proliferate them all to hell, and you'll win. I do notice a lot of players like to go after the guy playing poison counters in Commander, especially once they start getting a decent amount of poison counters. Because a lot of times, the first couple times I played this brew, my main pod didn't take it that seriously. They actually didn't even know it was a poison brew because they saw Rigo and thought I was just running a bunch of weak creatures. But then they were like, oh, dang it, they're all like poison. They're all toxic. They're all infect. They were like, it's a secret poison deck. But I have won with this brew several times. And it can definitely be made to be more competitive or more casual. Just, however you want to play it. But this is a great foundation for it if you don't just copy it outright. If you have any suggestions or want to share your version, feel free to drop it in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And I mean, if you enjoyed the video, and if you have any suggestions for a commander that you want to see me brew, I love to brew. So if you have a suggestion for a commander, just drop it in the comments. Let me know if you're looking for more competitive or more casual, and I'll brew it up and do a video on it. But that's pretty much all I got for today. Peace.